Hey guys, welcome to our screencast of chapter 16. We're going to be looking at the progressive error. You should have a sheet that I created for you. It's on student view, also in Edmodo, that kind of guides you on the major things that you need to be looking at for this section of notes. I believe there's 7 or 8 topics that will be responsible for. Make sure you're, as I go through these screencasts, I'm going to highlight your key vocabulary words, try to highlight some of the metadata. So make sure you're getting those things specifically as I go through this. And then please, as I go, make sure you're stopping, rewinding, rewatching so that you get it. I'm really going to try to focus on the key elements. I'm not going to have a lot of extra fluff in there. Just get you the stuff you need to be successful. So let's start with chapter 16 here, lesson 16. We're looking at the problems America's faced at the turn of the century. So yes, we know that America grew because of a mass amount of immigration, but also because of the new business that was coming to the United States. And so as people are moving in, as America's growing, we really start to see good things happen. At the same time, some of the negatives. There's a group, we talked about it in class on Monday. There's a group called the muckrakers. And the main purpose of the muckrakers was just to go and discover, talk about, and expose the negatives that were going on in the United States. And that was what they were trying to do. And so the muckrakers, they went around and tried to show people what's going on. One of the major thing that was going on was population. There's a major population boom in the United States, something called urbanization, which is the growth of the cities. At the turn of the century, we start to see population move from the country, from the farms, back into the cities. And they really say that the frontier being the West, and most people would say the West is anything west of like your Missouri River, Mississippi River, excuse me. The major population was done with by the by the early 1900s. And so people are starting to move back to the cities, better job opportunities. Factories were huge, and factories continued to dominate the world. And really, for the most part, industry grew, and it continued to grow. And your major businesses did not slow down at all, for a variety of reasons. So, challenges people faced, because of new technologies, is a lot of good things. Industries grew, iron and steel industries grew, everything grew in this late 18 and early 1900s. Things got better and better as more people moved to these communities. So we have big growth of cities. Now, one of the problems with the growth of cities, though, was that there really wasn't good living conditions for all these new immigrants. As this picture on the right, they call them tenements, also known as slums. Problem being that these buildings were not ready for the massive amount of people that were moving to them. And so they needed to find a way to provide safer and better housing because they just were not safe. What they call the infrastructure, roads, sewage, transportation, it wasn't ready for all these people. And so you have a lot of people who are packed in a very small area. There's one in particular, they call it the Lower East Side, housed 450,000 people in 1900. That amounted to more than 300,000 people per square mile. As in contrast, New York City as a whole housed around 90,000 people per square mile. So you can see this New York's Lower East Side, and make sure you note that in your notes. New York's Lower East Side was way, way overly populated, densely populated. There's too many people there, unsafe, not sanitary, not a good thing. But at the same time, these immigrants, they just wanted a place to live, and so a lot of people were a little more okay with it because it gave them an opportunity. The muckrakers' big thing is they were exposing working conditions, exposing how dangerous it was. They were exposing the reality of the workplace that no one really wanted to acknowledge. Child labor, the unsafe conditions, unsanitary food. There's a man named Upton Sinclair. He was a muckraker. He wrote a book in 1906 that looked at the meatpacking industry and how dangerous the meatpacking industry was, not just from the actual cutting of the meat, but also the chemicals used, the amount of dangerous substances they would use to clean the meat with it, but also, as it talks about here, the rats that would be used, or not used, the rats that would be running around because they themselves were looking for food and there was nothing that was keeping them away. And so these muckrakers are trying to get those industries changed, get it so people quit being able to get away with creating unsafe products. So the next thing to think about is the environment and the challenges that the environment faced. One of the biggest things was something they called deforestation, in which massive amounts of trees were being cut out and not replaced. They call these things extractive industries, where they're taking resources from the United States or from the earth, whether it's mining or oil or deforestation. People were rapidly using the resources, but they weren't doing anything to ensure that it was safe and it was done in an ethical way. They just didn't care. They just want to make money off it. And so we have a lot of pollution, a lot of rivers, a lot of smog, as you can see in this picture on the right. And people's health suffered for it. And it wasn't until people really started to get involved that anything ever really changed. Next section to think about is politics. As we talked about with these muckrakers, again, part of what they do is expose corruption. A guy named Lincoln Steffens, he specifically created a book called The Shame of the Cities. It was all about corruption within the communities. They had these things they called political machines. You can see political machine being an organization consisting of full-time politicians whose main goal was to retain political power and the money and influence with it. And so these full-time politicians, that's all they did. And then their goal was to always get reelected. So it wasn't uncommon for a politician to try to do what he can to make sure he got votes. If that meant helping out immigrants, that means helping out immigrants, whether it was ethical or not. What they did didn't matter to them. Whatever they needed to do to make sure they still got a vote. One in particular, this place called Tammany Hall, political machine in New York City, was especially powerful. They say they cheated the city as much as $200 million in 1870. It's a lot of money, pretty significant amount that this organization was able to do. So we have a lot of corruption, a lot of different levels. One of the other problems was something called patronage. Patronage is when you give friends a specific job. For example, if you're a politician and you want money from some people you know, and they say, hey, I'll give you X amount of dollars if you give me a job in government when you win the position. And they would say, yeah. Well, the problem was you're not getting the best people for the job. And it's just, it's unethical. It's wrong. And so they create something called the Pendleton Act. Pendleton Act, 1883, federal law that limited patronage by creating a civil service commission to administer exams for certain non-military jobs. So in other words, if you wanted a job, non-military in the government, you had to actually be qualified for the job. And so you couldn't just get it because your buddy or your daddy or whoever's there. You had to actually qualify for the job. Next area is just the social challenges that were going on in the United States. We are in early 1900, we're 35 years out of the Civil War, yet there's still a lot of social tension, racial tension between blacks and whites. And then new groups that were coming into the United States were specifically your immigrants. There's a picture over here on the left is kind of interesting, looking at how the different groups were in the United States. In one particular area, for example, of the Boston's North End, you can see the different colors represent different type of ethnic backgrounds and how they were all packed together, but yet they had to figure out ways to get along. Racially, you had these laws that the Southerners created. They called them the Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws segregated blacks and whites in all sorts of places, whether it's schools, trains, eating facilities. If you guys remember Rosa Parks, one of the reasons Rosa Parks got in trouble is because she sat where she was not supposed to sit as a colored woman. And so, yes, there's no slavery, but at the same time, there's still a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of discrimination for your blacks, your African Americans, but also for different immigrant groups that came in, all of which were just trying to get an opportunity. Women's roles change, American families change, morality is starting to shift a little bit as people go to the cities, as people become more and more educated, things start to change. One of the things that starts to change is children's or child labor. They really try to crack down on child labor and prevent that from happening. Another thing that comes around is something called your temperance movement. That's to try to eliminate or moderate the amount of alcohol that is consumed. We eventually do have an amendment that eliminates alcohol consumption, but that's not for a few more years. Ladies, you're still not voting yet at the turn of the century. That's a problem that they're trying to deal with, but it's something that just has not been fixed. Okay, so here's kind of a summarization of some of your major issues. The industrialization, that's the rapid growth of the United States, causing some companies to do things unfairly, monopolies, but yet it is what moves the United States to the top of the world. Urbanization being that growth of the cities, people moving away from the farms into the communities, packing men. Talked about a lot of environmental damage, people not being real smart about how they went about extracting things. But nonetheless, again, those things that help move us forward, um, there's going to be some damage done with it. Political corruption, look at that as being those political machines. A lot of corruption in politics, something that still takes place today, but very prevalent then. Then, of course, the different tensions in society. So a growing gap between your rich and your poor. Some people doing well, but a lot of people just not doing that well at all. So they try to fix that. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes on in the United States in the early 20th century. A lot of really good things, a lot of good industry, but at the same time, anytime there's growth, there's going to be some growing pains. And so it's up to some people to step up and get involved. And again, those are those muckrakers. So hopefully you took good notes. I try to highlight all the keywords for you. Make sure you have your notes taken and ready to go for class. Thank you guys. See you later.